that 1930s guy here from the second highest point in peninsular Florida, in the town just north of Brooksville in Hernando County. And after a little bit of an absence between videos, which I apologize for, I have two great ones coming up. And they have to do on the property where I am at, called Chinsaga Hill. And this very historic house, which has some incredible stories attached to it. And it has a connection to the Prohibition era, as long as with other eras. But I'm going to tell a story that happened here, and I'm going to connect it with Prohibition in general, and give it a description of how it was just such a problem, and everyone got around it, and it was just an interesting kind of weird short period of time in U.S. history, from 1920 when it started to the end of 1933 when it ended, and when the millions of dollars were made by criminals, when the alcohol industry was transferred from being a legitimate business to an underground business. Of course, that wasn't the intention. They really thought that this law would stop drinking and the evils associated with it, domestic violence being a big one, neglectful husbands who spent all their time at saloons, and they thought that this law could change everything, but they miscalculated how deeply entrenched drinking was in the culture of American society. And instead of going away, it arguably got even worse, but it just turned from a legitimate business to an illegitimate business. And there's a lot of great stories associated with it. One I'm going to talk about is from the man who lived in this house right here, who was an ardent prohibitionist, was very much in favor of it from decades before Prohibition, even afterward. His whole life, a big part of it was dedicated to preaching of how this could save America. This was just something we had to stick to no matter how hard it got. And but something strange happened to him in 1932. For a 2-month period, this guy disappeared into thin air. Nobody knew what happened to him, and it's still unsolved to this day. But it's a great story, and you're going to want to hear it. And I'm also going to have some information, I should say, from a former rum runner I have a transcript of an interview, as well as an audio recording of actual rum runner on Long Island and his experiences working for a big mob that delivered liquor around Suffolk County. So stay tuned for this. You'll enjoy it. In this house on Chinsaga Hill, just north of Brooksville, lived Colonel Raymond Rogers. Beautiful house, fully restored. But who was this guy, you're probably saying? Never heard of him. Most people haven't. But in the early 20th century, he was one of the biggest advocates for Prohibition and for progressive causes in general. He's so famous, so charismatic, that he became friends with Teddy Roosevelt, obviously probably the most famous progressive ever. And he gained a great speaking reputation. Met his wife through making a speech in Brooklyn. She was a very rich woman. He married into a lot of wealth, and he bought this property actually just before he got married, but they made it into this grand estate. And anyway, he became a colonel because he served in the World War in Russia in the Red Cross, but not strictly for humanitarian purposes. He was kind of a sort of more or less source of intelligence for the government, who wanted to know what was going on in Russia during the tumultuous 1917 revolutions they had there. And so he actually had a personal, not a friendship, but he met and talked with Lenin and Trotsky and all the bigwigs, Kerensky in the revolutionary Russia. And he got the rank of colonel, even though he never saw any fighting. And that he actually got that job through his friendship with Teddy Roosevelt. And when he got back, Prohibition started in 1920. The 18th Amendment, the Volstead Act, making the sale and possession of alcohol illegal. And at first, no one really knew what to expect from this new law. But they quickly, people in the criminal syndicates, there was always gangs and crime, but they saw a great opportunity here. So there was a great demand for alcohol. You couldn't buy it legally. So since every other country in the world still had alcohol, all you had to do was get it over here. And so quickly, ways were developed to bring alcohol in. Long Island was a big place. The west coast of Florida was another big place. And I'm going to discuss some aspects of Prohibition, both here in Florida and with some older footage I have from actually on the Long Island Sound. And I'm going to talk more about the guy who lived here. He has a very interesting story. Here is another rum-running highway. This is the Gulf of Mexico. This west central coast of Florida. And if you've ever been to the west coast, it's a lot different than the east. It's very swampy, very shallow water. And there's tons of nooks and crannies all over the coast. Perfect spots for hiding, running from authorities. Lots of places, shoals where bigger boats couldn't go. So it was very easy. Of course, the Caribbean, Cuba was a logical place to import liquor from. But here, this is a town called Bayport. And it has a significant history, even though today it's basically nothing. Just a few dotted houses and a restaurant. That's pretty much. But this was actually one of the first settlements in Hernando County, Florida, which was much bigger in the 19th century. And it was actually the first county seat. A lot of people don't know that because this was the port. There was no railroads for quite some time. I believe the 1880s was the first time the railroads reached Hernando County. Before that, Cedar Key, way up north, was the only part. So people wanted to export their goods, especially larger towns at the time like Brooksville. They had to do it through places like Bayport and bring it by boat up to where the nearest railroad connection would be. And because of that, during the Civil War, there were some notable confrontations here, because this was one of the areas exporting food and cotton to the Confederate soldiers. Even towards the very end of the war, they were one of the last remaining places to do so. In 1864, they sent a raiding party here to burn and pillage food farms, cotton storage areas, and they did it. They departed, came in off Anclote River, and they departed from here, from Bayport. And you could still see remnants from the fortifications that used to be here, right along the shore. don't think you're actually supposed to be walking in this area, but you can see all this rusted metal here. Fortification, some kind. But there was something here where there's nothing today. But back to the main point. Back on Chinsagut Hill in the house of Colonel Robbins. And Chinsagut is kind of a weird name. It's actually an Inuit Native American word, I believe meaning something lost that is found, or roughly to that translation. But Colonel Robbins was actually in Alaska for the gold rush. Didn't get gold, but he did gain his early reputation of being a great charismatic speaker, converting both the pioneers and the native population, and of course speaking about his favorite topic, Prohibition. And while he was here, on and off, his wife was wealthy. They had a house in Chicago, and they had a house here, and maybe some other places, but those were the main two places. So while he was here, during Prohibition, he discovered that supposedly there was a great liquor racket going on here on the coast. They were bringing in liquor to Hernando County, and the local officials were not stopping it. He didn't like that. So he fought very hard to straighten things out here, or at least he went around speaking about stopping the Prohibition trade here, and so that gained him some enemies. And on September 3rd, 1932, Colonel Robbins disappeared. They didn't know right away, but he was supposed to be here, and then from here he was going to go up to meet President Hoover for a discussion probably about the campaign for president. And so, but when he missed his appointment a week later, President Hoover called a search for Colonel Robbins. That's how important he was. The president called for federal agents to search for Colonel Robbins, and no one could find him. They talked to his wife. His wife said that he did receive threats from local bootleggers, racketeers in the Hernando County, Tampa, just to the south area. And he got threats to the point where he even told his wife that if he does get kidnapped and they ask for ransom, don't give him anything. Let them kill him, do what they want, but don't give these racketeers selling liquor any money. So he was in danger, and he knew it. So it's very likely that's what they were thinking happened. But then suddenly, 2 months later, in North Carolina, in a small town, a kid recognizes his picture and sends it to somebody who knew him, and he confirms that that's him, that he's living in this town under a false name of Rogers. And so finally he's reunited with his wife and other people, and he claims amnesia. He said he doesn't remember anything that happened over the last 2 months since he was kidnapped. He doesn't know how, or since he disappeared. I shouldn't say kidnapped. We don't know. But he claims that he has no memory of anything that happened. Why, he was traumatically hit, or there was violence. He doesn't remember. He just remembers nothing from September 3rd until November, the end of November, when he was discovered. So it's very strange. And his whole life, he said, he claims he never remembered. Now, some people say, well, it was, could have been that he was kidnapped. Also, it could have been because he could have just had some sort of breakdown and just wanted to get away from everybody. And he figured this was a good opportunity. I mean, he was campaigning hard for Hoover, so he could have been under a lot of stress and wanted to find a way to disappear for a while, and that was a good a time as any. So nobody really knows. Only he knows the truth, and he took it to the grave with him. All they know is that he arrived in North Carolina, and some people, they said they saw him by the end of September. They saw him in this town that he was discovered in November. And they said he would go around preaching, talking about God a lot, but no one really knew much about him. He was kind of a mysterious person, claimed to be from Kentucky, claimed to be a gold miner, which he did briefly in Alaska, but it wasn't exactly his lifelong career. So it's a lot of question marks about this whole story, about what exactly went on here. And it's one of those, another weird Prohibition tale going unanswered. Back a little bit south of where it was before in Bayport, Hernando County, West Coast, Florida. There's the Gulf there. And over here is the swampy inland areas, which made a perfect refuge for rum-running boats. They love places like this. And this was most certainly one of the spots, I'm sure, that they were bringing the liquor trade in to Hernando County, as Colonel Robbins was complaining against. I'm going to end this video here at the May Stringer House Museum in downtown Brooksville, which is behind me, here in a nice hill middle of Hernando County. Decided to make this a two-part video because there's a lot of information. I don't want to cram too much in. So this video will center around the Robbins story, but the next one I'm going to talk about the Leo Stridle, the actual rum runner in Suffolk County, who began working for some big liquor people in 1928, and he's got some great tales to tell. It's very interesting what he has to say. And I ended here because Stringer was a prominent doctor in the 19th century here, and I just wanted to add one more thing about the Prohibition era, is that they did have alcohol by prescription, which some rich people who had connections were able to get liquor that way. But most doctors wouldn't risk it. It was too easy to get caught. And so that wasn't really a prominent avenue to get liquor. It was... the Rum-Runners really ruled the game. They made it very easily accessible, and as you can see, there were enemies like Mr. Robbins, and there were people from the feds trying to stop them, but they never had really enough funding. The Wickersham Commission, which President Hoover initiated to study how to solve the issue of Prohibition enforcement, pretty much came to the conclusion that without a full police state, there was just no way that this was going to work. But they were too timid to actually advocate that it should be repealed, even though it was very much suggested in their report that it was impossible to enforce this, without some major funding and major increase in law enforcement. So that was towards the very end of Prohibition, and as the Depression hit, the tide just turned against it. The people for legalization, said it would reduce crime, it would create jobs and all this. It was a convincing argument, and it was repealed state by state. All the states that came up for a vote voted yes, except North and South Carolina, which actually voted not to repeal. They were the only two states that voted not. Not all the states voted, though. Just the one. They stopped when they had the necessary amount. But it was officially repealed December 5th, 1933. Not all the great dreams of this end to lawlessness and drinking, creating jobs really did pan out so much. Racketeering, they did have less funding for sure, but a lot of them switched to kidnapping, the numbers racket, different things like that. Kidnapping at first was a really big deal, and they actually passed a law in some states like Missouri making it a death penalty offense to kidnap anybody, because so many racketeers were turning to that. And so that pretty much will conclude this first video. I'll do more when we get to Suffolk County and Leo Seidel story, which is definitely worth listening to. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for part 2. It'll be great. Thank you.